Hi there, welcome to PhotographyQuestions.com. My name is Will. Today I'm going to go over about 5 easy tips to help you get immediate benefits or immediate results from editing your photos within Adobe Photoshop. So stepping right in, I've got my image open here. This is Cornwallis in Auckland at sunrise, if anyone's interested. So the first one we're going to touch on, in no particular order, is the crop tool, located here on the toolbar. Now the toolbar properties, the tool properties along the top here, we have width, height and resolution. Now here we can enter different values, so width and height in centimeters or inches, resolution pixels per inch or pixels per centimeter. I leave mine at 300 pixels per inch because this is a fairly standard print resolution. Now you can enter values in width or height, but you must be careful that you don't enter a value too large, because your image obviously will be a certain size, 15 by 10 inch here in this case. So if I were to enter in, say, being 15 by 10, if I entered 30 by 20, it's going to interpolate the pixels within my image, and while that can work to a certain extent, eventually you're going to start getting noise and artifacts and all that nastiness in your image. So when you're using the crop tool, if you do enter a width and height in here, then you're going to be restricted to that particular ratio, and you'll find that no matter where you drag the crop tool, it will stay within that ratio. Of course, as we have none in there, I can drag this to any dimension and direction I want, which gives you the freedom to crop your image however you desire. This particular image here, I had plenty of time to set up. I got to the beach nice and early, managed to frame my image. I knew where the sun was going to come up here, so framed it up, and I didn't have to worry about extra cropping when I got it back onto my computer. We don't always have that luxury with sports or wildlife, or even on a photo shoot where you might not have quite looked at the edge of your frame and there's a pole sticking out or something along those lines. Much easier to crop that out if you can, rather than going in and cloning it out later on. Also be creative if you want with your cropping. You know, we've got a vertical shot here, but it doesn't have to remain that way. You know, it could look quite good in a almost panoramic horizontal if you so desired. You know, it's going to make the image smaller, of course, but that could be more what you're after. You may decide that is what you want from that image. So you know, you're not always restricted to the dimensions of the camera. You know, that particular ratio, this particular one, of course I wanted to keep it that way, but you could also go you know, a nice square crop if you wanted. You can crop away to your heart's desire, and of course you can always go back in the history. It's good to make sure you have plenty of history states here. And one other thing to mention is that it does have this nice rule of thirds grid on here, and as you can see I just rotated that, which is done just by clicking and dragging outside of that. And you can of course reshape that crop parameters. I will also add, if you go outside of your image, it's going to add whatever color you have set as your background color over here to that image, so just be wary of that as well. Moving on, we have the healing brush tool, which can also be put in the same category as the clone tool. So the healing brush tool is found here, and it's usually the second one down here as well, so if you just click and hold there, you can drop down to that healing brush tool. Now the healing brush tool is good if you have, say for example, spots on your sensor, which generally show up in the sky if you're using a small aperture, f16, 22, that kind of thing. And what it does is it takes the underlying pixels or shade, I suppose, and overlays it to where you paint. So as an example, if I alt click here and move over somewhere else, you can see that it's going to paint in this particular area. So if I just go over this little branch here and release that, you can see that it's gotten rid of that quite nicely. You do have to be careful with this particular one, because if you go over an area that's got a line of high contrast, like this sort of edge of the branch here, you'll find that you'll get this nasty bleeding going on here. So it's more for areas where you're going, where you just have a spot. For example, if I had a spot on my lens there like that, so I don't have any spots to show you, I try and keep my sensor as clean as possible. But if I now take this and click on here and go over that spot, it gets rid of it nicely. Now the clone tool, on the other hand, does work a little differently. This one works by replacing an area with exactly the same pixels. So if I were to let's go back to that same little spot. If I were to alt click on here, we can go over this, and we can even go into the branch, and we're not going to get any of that bleeding at all, because this is replacing exactly what's there. Where you do have troubles with this one though, is when you might be trying to get rid of a particular spot and you end up with some really hard edges. This can be combated a little bit by softening down the brush you're using, but even still, it's an exact clone, so you're going to be a little bit careful using this one. But again, very handy tool. I don't use them very often, especially in my landscape work. It's more just to get rid of any spots that may be there because of dust on my sensor. And using them in conjunction with each other is quite a good idea. So that's those ones. Moving on, adjustment layers are very important, I believe. They're found down here on your layers tab. If you don't have that open, you can go up to Window and just make sure that Layers has a tick beside it, and that will open that one up for you. Now you can make adjustments, how a lot of people do it, by going Image, Adjustments, and then say whatever adjustment you want, your curves. You make your adjustment, hit OK, and you might continue on with your editing. And then maybe later on you go, well, that color actually looks a bit rubbish, so you want to go back and change that. Well, you can't, because you've now got another 50 history states above that curves that you did to begin with. So the best way to do that is to come down here to your Adjustment Layers tab and select Curves in here. So now you can do that same adjustment, but you have this now as a layer, so you can do 100 other things which will add them in your history state. But if any stage you want to get rid of this curves layer that you thought was rubbish, you simply make it rubbish and throw it in the trash down here, and that will get rid of it while keeping whatever other modifications that you've done that aren't on that particular layer. So within the adjustment layers panel here, we've got a huge array of different things you can do. I'm not going to go through them all right now for the sake of time, but your basic ones that you'll probably want to use will be your levels, curves, possibly your exposure, brightness, contrast, color balance, and if you want to go the black and white route, black and white there as well. Probably a good idea to just get in there and experiment and play around with them. It's the beauty of these things, is you can delete them. You don't have to save them on your image or anything like that. You can spend hours just playing with them. Yeah, get in and try them and and use them to your heart's content. One thing that is very handy also, which is kind of my next point but also ties in with this, so number 4 would be layer masks. And now each adjustment layer actually has a layer mask accompanying it by default. So for example, if I wanted to darken down the sky, I could go over here to the burn tool and go across the sky here using the burn tool and darken that down. But personally, I've never really liked the dodge and burn tool in Photoshop. Just the way it looks just doesn't appeal to me. I find it looks a little bit flat and washed out a lot of the time. Maybe I'm using it wrong, I don't know, but I've just never liked the look of it. So what I like to do if I wanted to darken down the sky here a little bit is I would use a curves layer, for example. I would then click on the layer mask. We have to make sure it's selected here, and I would come and add a gradient within that layer mask, and it's a radial gradient. We have to make sure we have the right one selected, a linear gradient, and then I would add that gradient. And what that's doing is it's masking out a particular portion of the curves adjustment we just made. And of course that's backwards, so if I just go Control I and invert that, you can now see that that's darkened down that top really nicely. And it's really even as well. So that's one way of doing that. And beauty of layer masks as well is you can simply brush using black or white. It's always black or white as a default. Colors aren't going to work on it. You can brush in here and you'll see that come up on your layer mask. You can go into your channels and turn that on so you can actually see how that layer mask is being affected. So layer masks are great, and that can be used with any one of these adjustments. Let's go through and do another one quickly. Let's say we wanted to change saturation of our sky a little bit here. Well, that's pretty much done it by itself actually. Let's say we wanted to do the master. Let's say we wanted to desaturate everything but around the sun there. Well, again, we can do that just by using the layer mask here. Make sure it's selected, because you can have the actual adjustment layer selected itself, so you've got to make sure it's got that extra line around it. Again, easy way to do it is use your gradient tool, and this time we will use the radial one. Find the sun there, and as you can see, we've now got color just around the sun. As you can see, it's on the layer mask there, so really handy. You can use layer masks on any layer as well, so just by adding it down here on that one there. They call it a vector mask there. Oh, sorry, that's adding a vector mask to your layer mask. That's the layer mask one there, so it should say, if you have another layer there, it should say add a layer mask, which it does. Yes, and point 5 was the paintbrush, again being used in conjunction with layer masks. So one way I like to do a bit of dodging and burning, as opposed to an overall adjustment like I did with the curves layer just before, is you can create a new layer, go to change its layer property to multiply. This is another area that you'll want to play with as well. All of these layer properties up here can be changed to do different things, and I'm not going to go through each one of them because there's so many, but the best thing to do is just play around with it. But I like to choose multiply and take my paintbrush over here, and using black or white here with a nice soft brush, I can paint in a particular area like that and change the opacity, and it acts as a bit of a dodge. Conversely, if you change this to overlay, or rather soft light, it's going to act as, and paint with white I should say, it's going to act as a bit of a dodge rather than a burn. Certainly helps if you have a tablet to do this as well, because doing very specific movements with the mouse can be quite difficult. That's about it for this video. I think I've rambled on long enough. 5 points in Photoshop to help you get your image ready to go, ready to save, and ready to be printed and displayed. So thanks for watching. I hope I have taught you something. I hope you've learned something. I hope I haven't bored you too much. If you do have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below the video. You can pop over to someone's letting off fireworks. You can pop over to PhotographyQuestions.com and ask some questions there. And if you do want to look at getting Photoshop or Lightroom or anything like that, we do have affiliate links on our website as well, which just helps us out at no extra cost to you if you decide to pick those up. So thanks for watching, and I'm going to go see what all the ruckus is about. Thanks very much. Bye.